Welcome to Vermont Artists and Authors, where we interview great storytellers and artists from the amazing Green Mountain State. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're honored to have with us the internationally celebrated and legendary award-winning Vermont author, Katherine Paterson. Katherine.
Yes.
Yes. So one of the things I wanted to, first kind of talk to you about as well is that you are a prolific author in a lot of not only children's books but young adult books and also some historical fiction. What would you say is that somebody was first came to you and said, "I got a 5-year-old child and I want to start them off on a Katherine Paterson book." What would be that first book that you would say that definitely, give your child who's 5 this book that I wrote?
Well, unfortunately, even though I have done several picture story books,
Right.
uh, they go out of print very fast.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
um, there's something about um, picture books that
Mm.
they're sort of like lettuce, you know, that they very few of them stay in print very long because they got to make way on the shelves for next year's crop of picture books. And, for example, the Blueberries for the Queen, which is a book that I really love. And my husband and I did it together because um, it's really his story. When he was a
Mm.
child, he picked blueberries and gave them to the Queen of the Netherlands, who was in exile during World War II. And they were staying at his family was visiting his cousin, and it was the town where the Queen had gotten Franklin Roosevelt to get him a place in Massachusetts to spend the summer. And so he knew that she was going to be in the same town that they were going to be visiting, and they grew a lot of blueberries. So he picked a quart of blueberries to take to the Queen, and his cousin just snorted. He said, they've got guards all over the place. You'll never get to see the Queen. And he, not daunted, he went and he got to the first guard and he said he had these blueberries for the Queen. And so the guard called the kitchen and said, "Well, I do. This little boy's brought blueberries and he wants to give them to the Queen." And the cook or whoever answered said, "Well, send him up to the kitchen and we'll make sure that he gets them, we get them to the Queen." So he goes to the kitchen, and the Queen's daughter, who was the crown princess, was in the kitchen, and she heard the little boy at the door, and she said, "Would you like to give them to the Queen yourself?" And he said, that was his original intent, of course, as a 9-year-old. And so he said, "Of course." And so he was taken into the room where the Queen was, and he gave them to the Queen. And she was very polite and came very graciously. And he ran back to his cousin's house gleefully. And the cousin was furious that he hadn't gone too. But so we were just telling this story to friends of ours because we were visiting that particular town, and and so John told them this story, and she worked in publishing, children's publishing, and he ran a children's bookstore, and they said, "Well, haven't you written that story?" And we looked at each other and we thought, "Why haven't we written that story?" So this is a fictionalized account of the story. Now, it makes me heartbroken that this book is out of print, and I'm always, because it's such a wonderful book to give to uh, when you have a new baby, because they can grow up with the beautiful illustrations and the story. And I got to have the dickens of time trying to buy a copy off the internet. But that's what happens to paper, to picture books. And so when you ask me what book I would recommend for a 5-year-old, I would definitely recommend this one. But good luck getting it. Is what I'm saying. And if it's a girl, I would definitely recommend uh, uh, The King's Equal in its illustrated form. But there again, uh, it's out of print. They have a sort of a lousy little paperback chapter book version of it with illustrations which were not even true to the story.
Oh wow.
But and I'm not going to recommend you buy that. But good luck finding this one on
Mm.
the internet.
As an author, how much sway or how much say do you have in the illustrators who work on your books?
Well, usually none. In the case of The King's Equal, uh, I'd been in Russia, or it was the Soviet Union there,
Mm.
and met Vladimir. And his there was an editor from Harper on the same trip, and she said, uh, "Why don't you and Fagan do a book together? You're enjoying each other's company so much." And I said, "Well, actually, Fagan does fairy tales. I mean, I had seen his illustrations. He was very famous in the Soviet Union as an illustrator. And
Mm.
I don't write fairy tales." And she said, "Well, think about it." And I really didn't think about it. And then one morning I was in the shower and this whole fairy tale just sort of popped into my head. And I couldn't wait to throw on my bathrobe and go to my study. and and the book kind of wrote itself. It was the quickest writing I'd ever done. Because usually, my novels take me from a year to 3 years to write. And here I'd written one in the shower. But um, I did do some editing on it, but it's essentially the story that I wrote in the shower. And I love it. And it's a wonderful book to give to young girls because it's about the power of young women who won't give up.
Right. Are you somebody that starts typing it out as it goes, or you have notebooks, or because you're still ready? As of recently, you just put out a book called Birdie's Bargain just
Yeah.
a couple years ago, so you're still very much still writing.
Well, I thought I was going to retire sometime. I mean, everybody was retiring or dying. Uh, and I thought, oh, well, my editor did uh, get sick and die. And I had the same editor for 40 plus years.
Wow.
And my husband, who was my main support, died. And I thought, well, the two people that have really made me the writer that I am uh, are dead. So
Mm.
I should quit. And I had often told Virginia Buckley, my editor, that when she retired, I'd have to retire because all of my novels to that point had been written with her help. And then I took a trip to Cuba, and I was so excited about the literacy effort in Cuba that turned Cuba in one year into a totally literate country. Uh, and when I came back, I was, just full of it. And one of my writer friends said, "You should write that story." I don't know, nobody, I'm not Spanish. I don't even, Hispanic, I don't even speak Spanish. I, how could I do it? But then I talked to a wonderful editor, Karen Lotz, and she said, I was thinking about, you know, a narrative about it with lots of photographs because there are many photographs from the Cuban literacy campaign.
Mm.
And she said, Catherine, I hear the excitement in your voice. I think it should be a novel. And so I began writing um, my Greek year about the young people who went out into the countryside and taught the peasants how to read and write.
Mm.
In 1 year, turned the country into a literate nation. And Cuba is still 99 something point something literate. America's, I think, 84% literate.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you can see we haven't done our job yet. And then I, I, I went to, I'm on the board of trustees at the Vermont College of Fine Arts, and I took part in a summer residency in England. And I was just going to be, do some speaking and stuff with the group. And they were having workshops. And I told the instructors that I wouldn't go to the workshops because, that was for people who had actually enrolled in. And they said, no, come ahead, it'll be fun. And so when I went to the workshop on how to write a novel, I thought, well, I got to pretend I'm writing something. And because that's what the workshop was all about. And I've thought of an idea that I'd been playing around with for years and never been able to turn into a book. And then I realized that another idea that I had played around for years, if I put the two of those ideas together, I could write a book. And then I broke my leg and ankle on the ice. Thank you, Vermont. And I was really laid up, and my kids were helping take care of me. And so my older son, who didn't want me to stop working, bought me a table that I could put my wheelchair underneath. And my younger son gave me a set of barbells so I could be strong enough to push the wheelchair into place. And I wrote Bertie's Bargain.
And so how do you know so Catherine, how do you determine that a story is going to be a good children's book as compared to historical fiction or as compared to like a young adult book? How do you kind of make that determination
Oh, I
of
don't
what
really
theme is going?
make that determination, Barney. I sort of
Yeah,
listen to the story, and the
right.
story tells me what it is. I mean, of course, something sparks the idea, um, and I remember my first three novels were historical novels set in Japan, and I
Yeah.
started them because I, I, I lived in Japan for 4 years, and I thought, well, I'm writing. I was taking an adult class on writing, and I was sort of writing short stories and things every week. And I thought, well, if I can write a story a week, they weren't selling. I could write a chapter a week. So I realized that my first novel has, I think, 14 chapters, and the year has 52 weeks. but, but it did take me at least a year to write it. And and I didn't know anybody uh, in publishing. I didn't have, I mean, nobody would have taken me on as an agent. Uh, and so I just went to the library and looked to see what books I admired, and that would be sort of like not not novels for young people set in 12th century
Right.
Japan, but what 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 publishers whose books I admired, and I just began mailing it out.
Mm.
And in those days, no more friends, I'm very sorry to say, but in those days, you could do that. You
Right.
could send you could send a manuscript to a publisher, and there'd be some flunky, usually a young woman just out of college who wanted to get into publishing, who would be assigned to read them. And of course, they wouldn't read every word of every book, but they'd read enough to figure out if they were worth taking to one of the real editors to read further.
Right.
And that's what happened to my first novel. Andrew Jordan, who was just out of college,
Hmm.
started reading it and took it to the senior editor, who had just come back from a trip to Japan, loved Japan, and decided to publish my first novel. So I
Wow.
fell, I, you know, you can call it luck, I call it providence, but that's how I got started.
Right. And so when you would like earlier in your career as well, did you end up writing stories that you wanted to tell, or did you end up writing stories that you wanted people to know about?
Well, I started, because I'm not one of these people that just has ideas blossoming all the time and you get to pick one. I
Right.
I finish a novel and I think, well, that was a good career while it lasted. And my family originally would get worried, and then they just started rolling their eyes because there's usually space between my novels. Um,
Mm.
I don't have another novel ready to jump onto, and sometimes it's a long space between novels because you don't want to waste all those trees. How many trees have to give up their lives for a modest publishing
Right.
effort? Too many in most cases. And is it going to be worth all those trees? You have to ask yourself, or is it going to be worth this many years of my ever shortening life? And any idea I begin to take seriously has to pass those two tests, and not many do.
Right.
uh, and that's why I have a file where I have failed ideas, and that's sometimes, as in the case of Bertie, they came um, to fruition, but they don't always do that.
And do you say when it comes to some of your stories, some of them have really strong characters, other have really powerful locations. When you start writing a story, like an impetus of an idea, does it come from a location that you want to write about, or does it come from you have an idea of a person that you want to tell their story?
Well, each book is different, as you can
Okay.
imagine.
Yeah.
Um, uh, for example, Jacob Without Love,
Hmm.
the impetus for that was suddenly being aware of conversations in which a perfectly intelligent friend of mine would say something like, well, mother always loved him best. Or, well, if my sister hadn't done so and so when I was 7 years old, my life would have been quite different. And I thought, do you really want to spend your whole life being crippled by childhood jealousies? And
Right.
I thought, um, you know, how sad. And and I thought, well, because I'm biblically oriented, I thought, well, just think of all the stories of sibling rivalry in the Bible. I mean, it starts out Cain kills Abel, right?
Right. Yeah.
And it just goes on from there. I thought, you know, we we're all so Freudian. We think the, the bad relationship is between parent and child, but I think just as many fraught relationships are between siblings. And so I decided I would write a story about twins. Of course, I've never been a twin. I don't really even have any good twin friends. But Jacob and Esau were my inspiration, and they were twins.
Mhm.
Um, and but I fiddled around with it for quite a while because I didn't have a setting. Um, and the setting is as important as character.
Right.
Uh, Whenever I hear a writer say, well, it could have been set anywhere, I get all worried about the worth of their work because a book has got to be set in a real time and a real place, even if you've made up the world as you would in a fantasy. Uh, it's got to be, it got to get its feet on some earth, and
Right.
it's got to be set in a certain time.
Mhm.
So, because I write realistic fiction, really. It wasn't until at Christmas time, sometime later, um, my sister gave my older son a copy of Beautiful Swimmers, which had won the Pulitzer, I think. It's the story of the crabbers and fisher folk on
Mm.
the islands off of Maryland and Virginia. I thought I'm going to set it on an island in the Chesapeake Bay because I want this young teenager to feel isolated. And boy, if I put her on an island in the Chesapeake Bay, she will really be isolated. I began studying about the islands in the Chesapeake Bay, and they were converted to Methodism by, the Methodists used to have horseback riders that went everywhere to preach. Well, this was converted by one that took a boat and converted the islands of the Chesapeake Bay. And the one of the most difficult sentences in the Bible is the one uh, which says, "Jacob have I loved, and Esau have I hated." And I'd always felt this deep sympathy for Esau, who was the one not chosen.
Mm.
Um, and so I thought I'm going to write a book and have Esau as the central figure. There's this wonderful sentence in the Midrash which says, Messiah will never come until the tears of Esau cease. And
Mm.
I thought, that, until that healing occurs, there's no real ending, no real. So, uh, you know, people have criticized the ending of Jacob out loud. And I said, but you don't understand. You don't call a book Jacob Have I Loved until you come to the place where you love Jacob.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
so my British publisher wanted me to eliminate the last chapter in which uh, Louise sees what happened when the day of their birth and comes to understand and love, of whom she's been jealous all her life.
Mm.
And um, yes, um, when people say, which is your favorite book, that's impossible to say. But if you ask me which book am I most proud of, it's Jacob of Loved.
Wow.
Because it was so hard to write for many reasons. And yet I finally looked at it and said, I did it. I did what I
Mm.
set out to do. Usually you finish your book and you think, did I do what I set out to do? In that case, I felt that I had overcome the things that were keeping me from writing that book. And of course, one of the things that was keeping me from writing the book was I thought it was uh, inspired by other people. So why was I so angry every day when I went to the typewriter? Oh, see, it's cheaper than psychotherapy, right?
It's true. I mean, so at that point when the book was finished, how much hesitation did you have, sharing that with your editor to say when you first sent out that draft for your editor to look at?
Oh my gosh. While I was writing Jacob, which took me, it was one of the 3-year books. In the meantime, Master Puppeteer won the National Book Award. Bridge to Terabithia won the Newbery. Gilly Hopkins won the National Book Award and was an honor book for the Newbery. Jacob Vidloff won the Newbery. Well, I mean, he did eventually, but those other books. And I thought, how can I send this book that I've struggled over and I'm not even sure if it's any good because it's going to be printed. Right. I mean, I should have had more respect for my editor. She wouldn't print something that was unworthy of her, much less me. But I thought, I think I'll just send it with a fake name on it. And if she decides to publish it, then it'll be okay. I'll tell her I wrote it. And so she, because it had been so long since she'd heard from me, she asked me, are you working on anything? And I said, well, yeah, but I'm not sure if it's going to be any good. And she said, please don't send it to me anonymously. And of course, that's exactly what I'd planned to do. I'm not sure I ever confessed to her that I had planned to send it to her in plain brown rock or something. But, when she read it, she really liked it. And I thought, well, okay. And then, of course, there's always revision. And then when I finally finished revising, I thought, it's okay, But I was astounded when it won the Newbery, just absolutely astounded. And in fact, when they gave me the call that it won the Newbery, I said, you got to be kidding. and the chair of the committee who called me said, Catherine, I do not kid about things like that.
And it's you've been a huge proponent for literacy, as you mentioned too, with Birdie's Bargain. I mean, you've been a part of the National Children's Book and Literacy Alliance for many years. Where do you see today in this recording in 2023? How do you feel like the success of the Children's Literary Foundation and the National Children's Book and Literacy Alliance and libraries in general? Where do you see the successes and where do you see some of the challenges they're going to be facing in the next few years?
I see mostly challenges. States saying they'll arrest librarians for reading books on the banned list and send them to jail. I mean, this hasn't happened since Nazi Germany, has it?
Right.
Maybe in Soviet Russia. What is our country coming to where freedom of the press, freedom to read what you want to read, is coming under attack by politicians? And parents can go to libraries and demand that books be taken off the shelves so that no other parent's child will have any access to them. I mean, come on, folks, what are you so afraid of? And you may have seen them, the t-shirts and the tote bags with the band and a shelf of books where Bridget Terabithia is sitting. And of course, that's out of date. Those are the books that were banned in the 70s and 80s. And I said, they said, are they banning you? And I said, no, I don't think they're paying any attention to me because I'm white and straight. It's everybody who's of color or LGBTQ plus that is being attacked now. And it breaks my heart. I just can't understand how you can go after another human being the way people are going after each other.
Right.
And that my country, which should be the freest, sweet land of liberty,
right,
should be having to go through this. It just doesn't make any sense to me. They were
Right.
teaching people to hate people
Right.
instead of care and
Yeah.
respect and love our
Right.
neighbors.
What would be your advice to people that are wanting to get into maybe writing, being an author in these times? What would be your advice to them?
Well, one of my sons is a playwright and writes screenplays. And when he started working in that area, because he started out as an actor and then he started writing, and I said, well, David, if you want to be a writer, you need two things. You need talent. And I know you have talent. You need persistence. And without both of those, you're probably not going to get very far. But you don't know if you have talent until you persist. And people are frequently asking me to read something and see if it's any good. Well, that's not my job. I'm not an editor, I'm not an agent, I can't really help you. In fact, the one manuscript that somebody asked me to look at, which I did, um, was refused, rejected. So
Hmm.
my say so didn't do any good for this person. And so I said, I really tell you, don't bother. And also, there's kind of a legal problem with me reading an unpublished manuscript. Because if I ever wrote anything that looked anything like yours, and this has happened to me, go try to sue me.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah. And my on one book, my publisher's lawyers had to get involved and make me swear that I had never read this other person's book, that they were sure I'd stolen my idea from them. Sorry, friends. But you got to keep at it because,
Right.
and what the thing I hear most of all is, well, I know I have this great idea for a book, but I just don't have time to write it. And I thought, nobody has time to write it unless that's, you know, um,
Right.
I 15 minutes a day. I started writing seriously when I had four tiny children, and I wrote around interruptions. And your subconscious is very helpful. Uh, and then, I would think when I was washing dishes or changing diapers, I'd try to pay attention to the children, and none of them died or got badly hurt. But um, then you take the 5 minutes of writing time that you're given and write down what you
Right.
can. It's a sloppy way, but sometimes it's the only way.
Right.
And if you really want to write, you'll find a way.
So Catherine, if people want to kind of learn more about the library of books that you've created and written, and learn more about you, where's the best place they could go to?
Well, I wrote a book. I always swore I'd never write a memoir, and
Right.
uh, I was persuaded. Well, I started doing it because I realized my husband was sick for many years, and I was mostly caretaker. And then I thought, well, I mean, I remember an old family story, and I started to tell it to one of my children. I said, well, of course, I told you about. And they said, no. And I realized that the stories I heard from my mother were when we were washing dishes together. And
Uh-huh.
most of my children's lifetime, they had a dishwasher. So many stories were going to be, lost if I didn't write them down. And I began writing
Oh.
down family stories. And eventually, um, after my husband died, we put them in a memoir, which is called Stories of My Life. Very, very imaginative title, of course. I wanted to call it Kitchen Sink Stories, but they didn't think that would be jazzy enough. So they gave the jazzy title of Stories in My Life to it. And it was published by, went out of print faster than it took me to write it. And then my denominational publisher, Westminster John Knox Press, put out an updated version to prove that I was still alive and somewhat edited version. So that's the version
Yeah.
that's available.
Perfect. And then and people can actually go also to katherinepaterson.com, and there's all of your books are listed there.
The stories of a lot of the books will be in Stories of My Life.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah, well, listen, Catherine, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a genuine pleasure talking to you
Well,
about writing.
well, it's always fun to talk about your stuff, and
Yeah,
so thank you for this opportunity.
you're welcome.